The courtroom was heavy with tension, thick enough to make breathing feel like a task. My name is Evelyn Monroe, and as I stepped through those tall oak doors, every whisper died in the air. Reporters froze mid-sentence, lawyers turned their heads, and my daughter-in-law, Melissa, smirked at my son as if victory already belonged to her. She didn't expect me to walk in. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, his shoulders bent, hands gripping his wooden crutch. His once confident blue eyes looked dim under the harsh fluorescent light. When he saw me approach, he tried to stand, but I placed a steady hand on his arm. "Sit, son," I whispered. "You've done enough. Let me take it from here." At the judge's bench, the gavel rested silently. Judge Stephen Morales, a man with a reputation for calm authority, froze when his eyes met mine. His voice trembled almost imperceptibly as he said, "Mrs. Monroe, what brings you here?" The murmurs began again, growing like ripples on water. I heard a woman's voice near the back whisper, "That's her, the Iron Lady of Justice." The name I thought I had left behind years ago suddenly filled the room like a gust of wind. I walked to the defense table, my heels clicking against the wooden floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. My old leather briefcase cracked, worn, but still strong, hit the table with a heavy thud. It wasn't just a bag, it carried my years, my scars, my fight. Melissa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her lips curled into a half smile. She didn't know yet that the game she thought she had mastered was about to end. I looked straight at the judge, then at my son, and said calmly, "Your Honor, I am here to represent my son, Daniel Monroe." The courtroom fell silent again, the kind of silence that holds its breath before history changes. Before that day in court, life had been simple, humble, but filled with love. Our small 2-bedroom house on Maple Street wasn't much, but it was ours. My husband, Mark Monroe, used to sit on the porch every evening, tapping his fingers on his coffee mug while Daniel kicked a soccer ball across the front yard. I remember thinking, this is what happiness looks like, quiet, ordinary, and safe. But happiness can vanish in a single breath. One night, when Daniel was 10, Mark put down his fork at dinner and said, without a trace of emotion, "Evelyn, I'm leaving. I've met someone else." The clatter of his knife against the plate was the last sound before silence swallowed the room. He walked out with a packed suitcase waiting by the door, as if he had rehearsed this moment long before. Daniel ran to the window, his small hands pressed against the glass, watching the headlights disappear into the night. I stood frozen at the table, a spoon still in my hand, unable to cry, unable to scream. When I finally turned to my son, his eyes were red and lost. "Mom," he whispered, "why did Dad leave us?" I could only pull him into my arms and say, "I don't know, honey. But I promise you this, and I will never be alone." I kept that promise. The years that followed were merciless. I worked 2 jobs, secretary by day, bookkeeper by night. I'd come home past midnight, take off my shoes quietly, and check Daniel's homework before washing the dishes he left for me on purpose, just to make me smile. We didn't have vacations or fancy dinners, but we had laughter and we had each other. When Daniel got accepted into a university to study electrical engineering, I stood in the kitchen, holding the acceptance letter with trembling hands. For the first time in years, I cried not from pain, but from pride. That night, I took my old wedding ring, the last piece of my past, to a pawn shop to help pay his tuition. Watching the clerk weigh it felt like watching my youth being measured in grams. But I didn't care, because that was the night I traded my past for my son's future. Years later, Daniel graduated with honors. He found a job with a construction firm in Chicago and called me the day he signed his first big contract. "Mom," he said, his voice full of excitement, "I'm going to build us a house one no one can ever take away." He worked long hours, saving every dollar, sometimes skipping meals just to make the down payment. When the house was finally finished, a modest 2-story home on the edge of the city, he handed me the keys with tears in his eyes. No more rented rooms, no more moving around. This is our home now. I stood in the doorway, touching the new wooden frame, feeling the heartbeat of every sacrifice that had brought us here. And for a while, everything felt right again. Daniel met Melissa a year later, a bright, charming woman with soft brown hair and a laugh that seemed to fill every room. At first I thought she was good for him. She made him smile again. They married the following spring under the old oak tree behind the house, with sunlight filtering through the leaves and Daniel's eyes full of hope. I remember whispering to myself, maybe this is the happy ending we both deserve. But life had other plans. 2 years into the marriage, Daniel's firm sent him to oversee an electrical project at a high-rise construction site. That evening I was washing dishes when the phone rang. A man's trembling voice came through. "Mrs. Monroe? There's been an accident. Your son fell, he's alive, but it's serious." I dropped the phone. The world tilted. At the hospital, Daniel lay wrapped in white bandages, motionless. Machines beeped beside him, each sound stabbing my heart. The doctor told me quietly that he would live, but his right leg would never fully recover. When he opened his eyes, I took his hand and whispered, "I'm here, Daniel. I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. Even if the world turned its back on him, I never would. At first, Melissa seemed devoted. She stayed by Daniel's hospital bed, fed him soup, and smiled when he tried to hide his pain. She told me not to worry, that she'd take care of him, that she loved him no matter what. For a while, I believed her. But people change when love turns inconvenient. When Daniel finally came home, his recovery was slow. I rearranged the living room so he could move around with his crutch more easily. Melissa was patient at first, but soon the small sighs began. She'd roll her eyes when he needed help reaching something, or complain about his therapy bills being too expensive. One morning, I overheard her on the phone while she thought I was still upstairs. "I can't live like this forever," she whispered sharply. "Once the house is split, I'll have enough to start over." Her words hit me like a slap. Split the house. The home Daniel had built from nothing? I froze in the hallway, my heart thundering. I wanted to storm in and demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped back quietly, my mind already turning. I had spent too many years in courtrooms not to recognize the sound of greed dressed as justification. From that day on, I watched her closely. Her modest clothes were replaced by designer dresses. Perfume and expensive handbags appeared. She started going out at night, saying she needed time to clear her head. The laughter that used to fill the kitchen was gone, replaced by the sharp clack of her heels against the hardwood floor as she walked out the door. Daniel didn't say much. He still looked at her with the same tenderness, refusing to see what was right in front of him. But every time I saw her glance at the house with that calculating look in her eyes, I knew she wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to take everything he had left. There was only one light left in Daniel's life, his little girl, Lily. She was 8, with bright freckles across her nose and the kind of smile that could melt away any pain. Every afternoon she'd sit beside her father on the porch, drawing pictures while he told her stories about how the house had been built. "This wall," he'd say, tapping the wood, "was made with my own hands, sweetheart." And she'd giggle, tracing her tiny fingers over the grain. But even that small joy didn't last long. One night, as I was getting a glass of water, I heard voices coming from Lily's room. Melissa's tone was sharp, almost panicked. "Lily, listen carefully," she said. "Tomorrow, when the judge asks, you tell him you don't want to live with Daddy. You say Grandma makes you uncomfortable. Understand?" I froze outside the door, my fingers tightening around the glass. There was a long pause, then Lily's small, trembling voice answered, "But Mom, I love Daddy and Grandma. I don't want to lie. My heart broke in two." Melissa's voice rose, colder this time. "If you don't do as I say, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live in this broken house forever? Do you want to end up poor like them?" I pressed my back against the wall, my knees weak. I had seen cruelty in courtrooms, but hearing it from the mother of my granddaughter was something else entirely. Tears stung my eyes as Lily began to sob quietly. "Please don't make me do it, Mommy." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old clock. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about money or a home anymore. Melissa was trying to destroy everything good that was left in Daniel's heart and twist an innocent child's truth into a lie. And that I could never allow. The next morning, I knew what had to be done. I couldn't fight Melissa with anger or tears. I needed the truth and proof. Years ago, I had worked beside men who thought justice was a game played by the powerful. I had learned how to win without raising my voice. It was time to remember who I was before life turned me into just someone's mother. I drove downtown to a narrow alley off Michigan Avenue, to a small, weathered office that smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. The sign on the door still read Robert Harris, private investigator. He was an old friend from my legal days, back when people still called me the Iron Lady of Justice. When I walked in, Robert nearly dropped his coffee. "Evelyn Monroe," he said with a grin. "I thought you were done with this life?" "I was," I answered. "But someone's threatening my son and my granddaughter. I need your help." He listened carefully as I told him about the accident, the change in Melissa, and her plan to take the house. When I mentioned she was seeing someone new, his expression darkened. "Give me a few days," he said quietly. "I'll find out who he is." 3 days later, we met in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Robert arrived with a small brown envelope and eyes that said he'd seen enough. "Her name shows up on credit transactions with a man named William Grant," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "A real estate mogul. He's married, rich, and dangerous. Melissa's been meeting him at the Lincoln Hotel every Thursday night." My fingers trembled as I opened the photos. There she was, Melissa, in a red dress, stepping out of a luxury car, laughing beside a man twice her age. Each picture felt like a knife twisting deeper, but I didn't flinch. I had seen enough betrayal in my life to know this wasn't about love, it was about greed. I looked up at Robert, my voice steady. "Thank you," I said. "Now it's my turn." That night, I sat in my room, staring at my old leather briefcase resting on the table. I hadn't touched it in years, but I knew tomorrow I'd open it again. The Iron Lady was coming back, not for fame, not for vengeance, but for justice. The morning of the trial arrived under a sky the color of steel. I helped Daniel out of the car, steadying his crutch as cameras clicked from across the courthouse steps. The reporters weren't here for him, they were here for me. Word had spread fast that the Iron Lady of Justice was returning to the courtroom after more than 20 years. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Every seat was filled. Even the marble floor seemed to hum with anticipation. Daniel sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted his papers. I placed my old briefcase beside his arm and whispered, "Breathe, son. Let me handle the rest." Melissa entered a few minutes later in a fitted emerald dress, her hair perfectly styled, her lips painted the shade of victory. Her lawyer, Jennifer Cross, followed close behind, sharp-eyed and polished, the kind of attorney who'd rather win than be right. They took their seats opposite us. Melissa didn't even look at Daniel. She just crossed her legs and smiled like a queen surveying her kingdom. The judge, Stephen Morales, entered. His eyes flicked to me, then lingered. He looked older than I remembered, but carried the same air of measured authority. "Let's proceed," he said, tapping the gavel. Jennifer stood first, her tone confident. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Melissa Monroe, has endured years of hardship caring for her disabled husband. She seeks fair compensation, half of their shared home and custody of their daughter." Every word was a dagger. I kept my eyes on her but said nothing. When she finished, I rose slowly, feeling the weight of 100 eyes following me. "Your Honor," I began, "the house in question was purchased solely by Daniel Monroe 2 years before his marriage. The property records, mortgage, and payments all confirm this. Therefore, it is not marital property." Gasps spread across the room as I handed the documents to the clerk. The judge scanned them, then looked up with raised eyebrows. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Before she could respond, I spoke again, my tone cool and steady. "But there's more, Your Honor. I have a recording taken in the Monroe household the night before this hearing." I nodded to the clerk, who plugged in a small USB drive. A familiar voice filled the courtroom, Melissa's. "Lily, remember what I told you. Say you don't want to live with Daddy, say Grandma scares you." Then came the sound of Lily crying, "But I love Daddy. I don't want to lie." The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of the speakers. Melissa shot to her feet. "That's fake, she's lying." Her voice cracked under panic. Judge Morales raised his hand for silence. "We'll hear from the child directly," he said. When Lily walked in, the sight of her tiny frame clutching her stuffed rabbit tore through the room. She climbed onto the witness chair, her feet dangling. The judge leaned forward gently. "Sweetheart, tell me in your own words, where do you want to live?" Lily wiped her tears, her voice trembling but clear. "With my daddy and grandma, because they tell the truth." A few people gasped. Someone clapped quietly before being hushed. Daniel buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. I placed a hand on his back, steady and proud. Melissa looked as if the ground beneath her had vanished. Her lawyer pressed her lips together, eyes lowered. The room wasn't just silent, it was changed. Everyone could feel it. I stood, my voice calm but sharp as glass. "Your Honor, the truth doesn't need permission to speak. It only needs courage." And in that moment, justice began to breathe again. The following week, the courtroom was so crowded that people stood along the walls. Reporters filled every corner, their pens ready. I held Daniel's hand as Judge Morales entered, his expression unreadable. He cleared his throat and began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of every truth uncovered. After reviewing the evidence, testimony and recordings, the court finds that the property in question was purchased prior to the marriage. Therefore, full ownership remains with Mr. Daniel Monroe. A ripple of gasps spread across the room. Melissa's face went white. Her lawyer closed her eyes briefly, accepting defeat. The court further grants sole custody of the minor child, Lily Monroe, to Mr. Monroe and his mother, Mrs. Evelyn Monroe. Mrs. Melissa Monroe shall receive no financial compensation and may only visit her daughter under supervised conditions. The gavel struck. It sounded like thunder. For a moment there was complete silence and then quiet applause, soft but full of feeling. Daniel turned to me, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, we did it." His voice cracked and I pulled him close. Lily ran into our arms, crying, "Daddy, Grandma, we're staying together." I held them both, feeling their hearts beat against mine. My eyes blurred with tears, but my soul felt light. The house that had once been a battlefield was now safe again, wrapped in truth. Justice, long silent, had finally spoken. In the weeks that followed, the noise faded. The reporters moved on to new stories, and Melissa disappeared from Chicago's gossip columns. I later heard she had been abandoned by the man she risked everything for, left to rent a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. I didn't rejoice in her downfall. I simply felt quiet. Some lessons come too late, but they come all the same. Meanwhile, our home began to heal. Daniel started physical therapy again, determined to regain strength in his leg. Each morning he practiced walking across the porch while Lily cheered, "You can do it, Daddy." Her laughter filled the air like sunlight after rain. I returned to simple joys, baking bread, tending to the small garden behind the house, sitting with Lily as she drew pictures of the three of us under a bright blue sky. Sometimes I'd catch Daniel watching us with a soft smile, a look of peace I hadn't seen in years. One afternoon I found Lily in my room wearing my old high heels and pretending to hold a court file. She pointed her finger at an invisible jury and declared, "Justice will always win." I laughed until my eyes watered. Daniel joined in, his voice warm and full of life again. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel haunted by pain or betrayal. It felt like home, strong, honest, and ours again. Now, when I sit on the porch and watch the sunset melt over the rooftops, I often think about everything that happened. Life has a strange way of testing what we're made of. It can take our health, our peace, even our faith in people, but it can never take our truth. That's something no one can steal. Daniel still limps a little when he walks, but every step he takes is a reminder of his strength. Lily's laughter fills the evenings, and sometimes she curls up beside me and says, "Grandma, when I grow up, I'll be brave like you." I tell her she already is. Justice doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it waits, silent and patient, for someone to have the courage to wake it up. When I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't fighting just for my son, I was fighting for every mother who has ever been told to stay quiet, to let things go. I fought so my granddaughter would learn that truth, no matter how small, can stand taller than any lie. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, remember this: you don't need power or wealth to win. You only need heart, faith, and the courage to speak when silence feels easier. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because every story of truth deserves to be heard.